Whoa, 40 degrees, baby. It's practically summer in here. Jesus. All right, if you are anything like me and are a big fan of ancient history theories, you've probably heard of Lovelock Cave. It's a remote archaeological site that's most well known for the strange human remains that were allegedly found there. And because of these remains, it has become rife with conspiracy theories that have found their way into the mainstream consciousness through their repetition on apps like TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. And as a result, turned Lovelock Cave into one of the most well-known but most misunderstood archaeological sites in all of North America. So today, we are going to be taking a deep dive into this site. We'll be going over the conspiracy theories and the videos that popularized them, as well as the actual archaeology and research at Lovelock Cave, and ultimately, together, be able to unravel the truth behind this mystery once and for all. Howdy friends, my name is Milo Rossi, and today it is my great pleasure to welcome you to a deep dive into the strange world of Lovelock Cave. All right, I think the best way to probably kick this off is just to make sure that we're all on the same page. Thankfully, the conspiracy theories about Lovelock Cave are pretty easy to summarize because every single conspiracy theorist that talks about them is just copying one another. So honestly, I think the best way to make sure you are up to speed is just to let the conspiracy accounts tell you about it for themselves. Okay, but right before I start that, I'm gonna warn you guys. If you are of age and trust yourself enough to do so, this is the point in the video where you're gonna wanna grab one of these because this shit's about to go off the fucking rails. All right, let's see what they have to say.
Everyone, I'm here in Lovelock Cave.
Lovelock Cave.
Lovelock Cave. Lovelock Cave.
Lovelock Cave.
Lovelock Cave.
Lovelock Cave.
Giants.
The giant.
Giant bones.
Those that appeared to be women were small. Because the man was a giant.
Red-haired giant.
Red-haired.
Red hair.
Red-haired.
And they were cannibals.
Cannibalized.
Cannibalistic.
An insatiable hunger for human flesh.
Six-fingered.
Dug up in that cave.
In exactly that location.
Two preserved bodies of giants,
7'7".
8.5 feet.
to 9'6".
The other two they found were like 10 feet tall.
So maybe the 8-foot one was younger.
Right, like a teenage giant.
Huge.
Back in the day, they literally used to have in the circuses people that were 6 feet tall, saying,
What happened according to Sarah Winnemucca?
Native American legend.
Sarah Winnemucca.
A Paiute woman named Annie.
And Sarah Winnemucca.
The Sitika.
Sitika.
A Sitica.
The Sitika.
Hold themselves up in the Lovelock Cave. And the Paiute people.
They piled all sorts of brush.
And lit the place on fire.
So as the fire's burning, the giants come out, they killed all the giants.
Now, if you're a Native American trying to burn out the cannibal giants, you'd probably be firing your flaming arrows from somewhere around this location.
So this matches the story almost precisely.
Though there is plenty of evidence
Look at all the burn marks.
Evidence of extreme burning.
of a giant handprint,
There was this black hand.
a pair of sandals about 15 inches long,
Fit someone who's about 9 feet tall.
that the Redheads had, quote, long faces and were light-skinned.
Like white men.
Different kind of people than the Native American.
It has not been established definitely that the mummies were those of Indians, for their skin was much lighter and the eye sockets of the mummies were slanted.
Like Oriental eye.
And they had been buried in a similar manner to the way it was done in ancient Egypt.
Was it giants? Was it Nephilim?
Many scientists have become dismissive.
The archaeological evidence, as usual, just seems to go missing.
Modern science claims that the giants of Lovelock Cave were not giants at all.
There were giants here. The reason why it's been
Deliberately obfuscated.
because it points back to the supernatural worldview. It points back to the biblical narrative. I'm L.A. Marzulli. Thanks for watching.
I don't know what to say. I warned you guys. Trust me, if you thought that was painful, you have no idea how many times I needed to watch every single one of those clips in order to make that montage. So that I don't think I'll ever be the same. I wonder if there's a DSM page for this. So I don't blame you if you just completely blacked out for everything that happened there, but luckily for you, I was taking notes. So here's the major bullet points. Lovelock Cave was once home to a race of redhead cannibalistic giants. There was that one guy in there who said something about them having 6 fingers. I don't know what that's about, but it sounds freaky, so I'm with it. Apparently their remains were found in Lovelock Cave and they were anywhere between 6'6" to 10 feet tall. The brilliant minds of the conspiracy world appear to have not been able to formulate a consensus on that, but I expect a paper published on it soon. There was also something in there about putting tall people in zoos, which felt a little out of pocket, but honestly, I think is a great idea, and it has my full support.
Step right up.
Seriously though, I did really get a kick out of those kids. I feel like I could smell the dab pen in that video. And anyway, all of this lines up with the oral history of the Paiute tribe, who say that the cave was once home to a race of red-headed giants called the Citations, and that hundreds of years ago, their two groups went to war, and they killed all of them in this cave by filling it with brush and setting it on fire. Then there's some other evidence they mention, like fire damage, a big handprint, and a big sandal. I like any conspiracy involving large footwear. I don't know about that one. You know, when I hear they discover a giant sandal, all I can think to myself is somewhere out there, there's a giant that's barefoot. And I mean, whew, it sounds freaky, I'm with it. So where do all the conspiracy theorists go with this? Well, of course, it was a different race than the native people. What were they? Were they Egyptians? Were they Nephilims? Were they a bunch of white dudes? I don't know. The brilliant minds of the conspiracy world have yet to reach a consensus on this as well. And very importantly, the last part, the reason you don't know about it is because big archaeology, big academia, the cover-up, the destruction, suppression of evidence and free speech, science bad, blah, 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 same fucking rigmarole it always is. Okay, so that should bring us pretty much up to speed on what this conspiracy is about. And like I said earlier, that really is everything you need to know, because these videos are a dime a dozen and all of them say pretty much the exact same thing. There's also this video I found which just absolutely took me out.
Giant red-haired warriors, locked in a cave and burned alive. This isn't Hollywood fiction.
This isn't Hollywood fiction. It's
the Peter Snipper guy.
I can't get over that voice, dude. It just kills me every time. This video is called Lovelock Cave Giants Mystery Finally Solved, and it's way worse than we thought. And are you ready for this? This is the thumbnail for it. Mwah! Just a piece of high art. I think the fact that the thumbnail is like a fake Fox News headline tells you everything you need to know. It's like a AI slop, clickbait account that's just made to like prey on, boomers with an internet connection. But honestly, I'm really glad that someone somewhere had the lack of self-respect to make this thumbnail, because now I get to use it in my thumbnail. This account, which I swear I won't dwell on for too long, is called Unbelievable Tales, and these are some of the other thumbnails from it. So like, this is just how they roll. This is just how they roll. This is their thing. Okay, so we're gonna go over all of these conspiracy claims together later. But I wanna do this sort of like a murder mystery. I wanna give you all of the information that you need first, and then we are going to solve this mystery together. I think part of the reason why this conspiracy has been able to proliferate so much is because conspiracy accounts leave out important evidence that would allow people to draw the appropriate conclusion for themselves. So to kick things off, let's first talk about the history of Lovelock Cave. Lovelock Cave was the first major archaeological site to be excavated in the Great Basin in the modern state of Nevada. If you look at its location on a map, you can see that it's located on a ridge made out of sedimentary rock. And all that flat land that you see around it is the remains of an ancient lake bed. This lake, called Lake Lahontan, was massive and filled much of the Great Basin during the end of the last glacial period. It existed for around 35,000 years, and at its largest, about 13,000 years ago, it covered 8,500 square miles. Here is a list of some other things that are around that size. I'm leaving this one up to the editors, so I hope they don't pick anything really stupid. Boom, here's a graph, just to make sure you're paying attention. This graph shows the high water line of Lake Lahontan over time. As you can see, that high water line fluctuated at around 4,200 feet above sea level, but at its largest, it would have been about 4,400 feet above sea level and 900 feet deep at its deepest point. Here is another list of things to illustrate 900 feet. Again, I'm leaving this one up to the editors, so I hope it's not something really stupid. But I will say what is really stupid that I'm just sort of noticing now is the most American thing I could ever do is look at this graph and convert all of the units into imperial. Hoorah, baby. That's how we do it here. He says, drinking a Mexican lager. This 900-foot deep part of the lake is in an area called the Carson Sink, which is the flat land just south of Lovelock Cave. If we go back to our map, you can actually see that the cave is located at about 4,200 feet above sea level, which, as you'll remember, is kind of what the average high stand of the lake was, illustrating that Lovelock Cave was formed over thousands of years of water lapping against this soft sedimentary rock. So as weird as it is for a cave in the desert, Lovelock Cave is kind of like a sea cave. If you know anything about modern Nevada, you might be wondering why ancient people wanted to settle here. Well, during the end of the last glacial period, it would have been a very different world. Pollen data reveals that what's now a desert would have been a sagebrush steppe. and the giant shallow lakes from this wet, cool environment would have been surrounded by productive marshland. There was even enough moisture that some of the mountainsides boasted small scrub pine forests. For most of the last 40,000 years, this would have been a pretty awesome place. It would have been teeming with fish and water birds and the woodland creatures of all shapes and sizes. You can actually find fragments of this ecosystem that tell us what it might have looked like up in the Warner Mountains in Oregon. Now, in a 2,000-year span, about 12,000 years ago, the water of Lake Lahontan dropped about 600 feet. And by about 9,000 years ago, it had dropped so much that it just fragmented into a bunch of smaller lakes in different low-lying areas. And even though the productive environments were starting to shrink, they clung to the edges of these lakes. There was one to the south of Lovelock Cave in Carson Sink that, as recently as the mid-1800s, covered 500 square miles, and another one to the north of Lovelock Cave in Humboldt Sink. Point is, even after Lake Lahontan had dried up, Lovelock Cave was still near some very productive ecosystems. And what do productive ecosystems bring with them? People. James Hart and David Pugh filed the first mineral rights on Lovelock Cave in 1911 in order to mine bat guano for fertilizer. As they dug, they came across all kinds of artifacts, but only kept the things that were really interesting. All of the stuff that they didn't deem interesting, they literally just threw out of the cave. Hart, one of the miners, sent a letter to Alfred Kroeber, the founder of the University of California Anthropology Department, and in this letter he says that he found a lot of old Indian relics in a very good state of preservation. A strange thing for a man to say who just spent the entire summer throwing those relics out of the cave, but hey, you know, to each his own. Kroeber would send a man named Llewellyn L. Loud to excavate the cave in 1912. By the time Loud had got there, miners had stripped down the top 3 to 6 feet of bat guano from the cave, and with it, every single piece of archaeological context in all of those layers. In fact, the only reason the mining in the cave stopped is because they hit a layer that was so rich with artifacts that it was no longer profitable to separate the guano from them. Loud, the man that was sent to excavate, also had pretty terrible excavation practices, but I'll cut him a little bit of slack. This was long before modern archaeological principles, and Loud wasn't even an archaeologist. He was just a guy that he liked being outside, and so they sent him there for some reason. But regardless of the heavily damaged site and Loud's questionable methods, he ended up recovering 10,000 artifacts from the cave. This is where the problem with his excavation practices come in, though, because he didn't register what layer they were found at. As we've discussed here many times, the most important part of archaeology is context. Artifacts are not worth a goddamn thing when they are in a box. It is the context that they were found in and the layer that they were found in that tells us pretty much everything that we want to know. So while Loud at least preserved the artifacts instead of just throwing them outside, by modern standards, what Loud did at Lovelock Cave was just a step above what the guano miners did. He ended up digging at the cave twice, once in 1912 and once in 1924, between which the cave was heavily looted by personal collectors. And finally, in 1927, Loud would publish his report on his findings more than 17 years after first excavating at the cave. Now, credit where credit is due, even though Loud was a bit of a bull in a china shop in Lovelock Cave, his is the most extensive report that we have, probably because he took pretty much everything out and didn't really leave anything for modern excavation, but that's neither here nor there. Among the 10,000 artifacts Loud recovered were some pretty amazing things. There was baskets, mats, shoes, and nets, many of which were made out of tule, which was a reed or a grass that would grow along the edges of the ancient lakes. Tule was an important part of the native cultures in this area. It had an edible root that was kind of like a tubery potato thing. Its stems could be split and used for weaving, and its pollen could even be used to make a sweet candy. But probably the most impressive thing Loud found was a cache of 13 duck decoys that were stashed in a little door. They're decorated with feathers, charcoal, and red ochre and date back 1,500 years, making them the oldest duck decoys ever found. This, along with countless other artifacts, show the sophistication of the people that once called this cave home. Now, human remains are probably one of the most important parts of this story because it hinges on the whole giant thing, so we should probably talk about that as well. By the time Loud arrived, guano miners had looted many of the skeletons and mummies from this cave. And we have no idea how many there were here originally because they were either sold, lost, or literally just thrown out into the refuse pile. And even Loud, for all his fault, made note of how badly the mining had damaged the site. He did end up finding a handful of remains in situ. If you want to read the details of those burials, they will be on screen, but I'll give spark notes. He found about 10 graves of men, women, and children. Most of them reflected their lake environment being wrapped in nets, and their grave goods included things like shells, feathers, beads, baskets, atlatl darts, spear points made out of flint and obsidian, and textiles woven out of tule, animal hides, and even bird skins. Some of them had been cremated in their burial pits, and among them were several graves that had been pilfered by coyotes, as evidenced by chewed human bones, and even coyote feces with beads in it. There were also many loose bones that mostly went as footnotes in Loud's work, with the notable exception of 3 human bones found near the cave entrance that appeared to have been split in the same way that an animal bone would be to extract marrow, potential archaeological evidence of cannibalism. If we take all this and compare Loud's report to our modern understanding of the site, we can piece together a fairly accurate timeline and profile for the people that once called this cave home. The oldest known evidence at Lovelock Cave dates back to about 2500 BCE, almost 5,000 years ago. These groups were reasonably adapted to their lake environment and left behind things like baskets and nets. Then at around 1500 BCE, or 3,500 years ago, kind of begins the golden age of Lovelock Cave. This is when we start to find a more elaborate material culture, things like slings, waterfowl hunting gear, and those beautiful duck decoys. The coprolites, or feces, of these ancient hunter-gatherers shows us that their diets were up to 90% reliant on the Humboldt Sink, the ancient paleo lake that existed to the north. Their diet consisted of fish, waterfowl, small mammals, and wetland plants like cattail and tule. Some people refer to this as the Lovelock Cave culture, but I don't know if that's totally accurate because it's very similar to many of the other lake-adapted groups in the area, rather than its own distinct material culture. It's more like a little island in a sea of similar groups that, of course, is going to have its own little differences. Anyway, this golden age seemed to last until around 500 CE, at which time occupation in the cave seemed to die down. Seemingly around the same time, a large boulder broke from the cave ceiling and partly blocked the entrance. From here, it was used intermittently either as a place to bury the dead or as a place to cache goods, as recently as into the mid-1800s, where a Paiute cache was found with metal gun parts. So that's the general archaeological overview of Lovelock Cave. So with all of that understood, let's start to unravel how this fascinating but totally unmysterious archaeological site became a household name in the world of conspiracy theories. Wah! As you guys know, I don't do sponsorships on this channel. I get that we all need to make our bag, but given my convictions, I can't in good faith accept money from the evil corporate overlords to sell you a fucking app or a subscription to something that you don't need. I would much rather fulfill that side of the business by putting something into the world that I'm actually proud of and can stand by. Which is why my team and I put a lot of TLC into designs like this. These bad boys are our new pin set. We got the Google Debunker Sheriff badge, enamel, beautiful. Another Google Debunker Sheriff badge, this one's metal, awesome. It's like that parrot, metal. And this set of mini pins. Oh, and we also have a couple patches. I know you guys are jacket people, so, you know, jacket people, pause. All right, jacket people, guards, jack this man. Bailiff, jack this man. These here designs were made by my wonderful partner, a real human artist with not a single AI involved. And a portion of each sale goes directly back to the artist as part of my pledge to give back to artists in a world where art seems to be valued less and less every day. So if you want to help support the channel and get a nice pin to decorate your backpack or your jacket, there's a link to that in the description of this video. We even have a few Northeast Tour skull pins left over that we're selling off the last of. They'll never be printed again. Myself and the team greatly appreciate all your purchases because it helps us continue doing what we do here and hopefully gives you a nice little something that you'll be proud to wear. Okay, back to it. One of the key figures responsible for giving rise to the conspiracy at Lovelock Cave is a man named John T. Reed. Reed was a mining engineer and amateur anthropologist, also known as a grave robber, who lived in the area around the end of the 1800s. He was close with many of the Paiute families and was fascinated by their folklore, and allegedly visited Lovelock Cave in 1886 with some Paiute guides who shared with him the story of the Citations. He became convinced that this ancient story was 100% factual and began searching for evidence. At some point in the 19-teens, Reed caught wind of a 6'6" red-headed mummy that had been found in Lovelock Cave, a claim that proponents of this conspiracy continue to make to this day. Reed took this claim to mean that he was right all along and began building out his own collection of bones in order to prove the existence of giants. And by build a collection, I of course mean pilfer Native American graves and ancestors. I wonder if he saw how ironic it was to channel his inspiration and interest in Native American culture into the ransacking and pilfering of their ancestors' graves in order to prove a theory rooted in Western biblical literalism. It's really amazing. Once Reed had stolen enough bones, he began testing his theories by measuring their thigh bones. Among these was one that was 16.5 inches long, which he believed belonged to an individual that was about 7.5 feet tall, and another one that was 18.5 inches long that he said belonged to someone who was about 9.5 feet tall. We're gonna dive a lot deeper into these claims in just a minute, but now you know that the wide range of giant heights from Lovelock Cave that every conspiracy theorist in the modern day talks about, Reed took one alleged report and ran with it, produced a bunch of his own data and published it without checking any of it, and sort of spawned a theory that has been talked about by everyone from Old West tabloids to these kids I went to high school with, you know, hotboxing someone's mom's SUV.
But back then, thousands of years ago, 6.5 feet tall was already huge.
I know, I can't wait to get into these videos either, but there's one last thing we need to understand in order for you to have all the context. Whenever this story is mentioned, it always goes back to Sarah Winnemucca. Sarah Winnemucca, also known by her native name of Thukmentone, trying my best, here it is, was the daughter of Chief Winnemucca and was a Paiute writer and activist who would travel the country sharing with American citizens the horrors that her people had experienced at the hands of their government. Her book, Life Among the Paiutes, records the first 4 centuries of contact and subsequent ethnic cleansing that her people faced at the hands of the American Empire, as well as personal stories, oral histories, and anecdotes. This book actually holds an important place in the American literary canon, as it is the first known autobiography ever written by a Native American woman. I was skimming through it while making this video, and it's a great read. I honestly feel like it's something that should be, you know, integrated into the school system. Oh, like that's ever gonna fucking happen now. Jesus Christ. Oh man, we'd be lucky if in 4 years, 1, kids even still know how to read, and 2, that their required reading isn't like fucking Mein Kampf or something. Anyway, you can read the entire thing online. I've linked it down in the description with the rest of my sources, and I think it's well worth looking at. I think there's, it's a good perspective to be able to learn from. Unfortunately, Winnemucca's book is most well known today, not as a harrowing account of colonialism by a Native American woman, but as supporting evidence for the theory that there were giants in Lovelock Cave. Her book is the first written account of the story of the Citations, and so it is cited constantly by conspiracy theorists. Now, this is a part of this story that kind of makes my hackles stand up a little bit, because all of them phrase it in the same way. They all say, according to tribal historian Sarah Winnemucca, but they're not actually doing this out of reverence for Winnemucca, her work, or her people. It's a facade for conspiracy theorists to legitimize their claims with an ancient story and to armor themselves against criticism by feigning reverence for the indigenous. It is honestly sinister and fucking disgusting to watch people use Winnemucca's work not as an opportunity to learn about her culture or the plight of her people, but instead to support their conspiracy theories that directly lead to the erasure of her people through claims of biblical literalism and the lost white groups of America. Despite how pivotal Winnemucca genuinely is to this story, she's talked about by all these people like she's nothing more than a fucking token. A cigar store Indian, a stereotype to evoke an ancient spiritual lore to appeal to a non-native audience. I could go on about how slimy it is to see conspiracy theorists use Winnemucca's work in this way, but unfortunately, this is par for the course for an ancient history conspiracy theory. I'm sure someone who's actually native or is just more learned in this than me would have a much more eloquent and lengthy take on this, but I want to say this here just to illustrate that, you know, you can be a fucking white dude and be able to, you know, call a frog or something, you know? Call a spade a spade, is that it? Call weird, gross cultural appropriation that borders on white supremacy, weird, gross cultural appropriation that borders on white supremacy, you know? Anyway, because of the countless disingenuous ways that Winnemucca's story is constantly used, I think that you deserve to see it in its entirety. I mean, it's constantly used as a keystone that holds this theory together, so I'm sure that conspiracy theorists would have no problem with you reading the whole thing. Right? It's definitely not going to make them look like a bunch of fucking sheep who just regurgitate what other people say and don't even check the source material because they're fucking stupid. I'm pissed off. I'm cold, it's dark, and I'm pissed off. All right, I'm not going to read the entire thing. It's about 700 words, but I'm going to put it all on screen. And I recommend you pause and read it if you really want the full picture to show that I am not twisting her words at all here. So the story goes that there is a group of barbarians that live in the mountain near Humboldt Lake. The main emphasis of the story is cannibalism. This group would eat their own dead, they would kill other groups and eat their dead, they'd carry the dead off the battlefield and eat them. They were weird dudes. She says that they were brave and strong warriors who could jump and grab arrows out of the air and then shoot them back, a la Legolas. She says the barbarians and her people spoke the the same language, and some of her people even tried to bring them into their families to civilize them, but they wouldn't change their ways. After a long time, the two groups end up going to war with one another. She says they numbered around 2,600, the war lasted about 3 years, and at the end, the group had holed themselves up in the mountains north of Humboldt Lake. She says that they were starving, and when they would come out of the cave to get water, her people would shoot them. Her people piled wood at the entrance of the cave, and the barbarians took the wood into the cave. Once it was full, her people gave them a final chance and told them that if they would just abandon their ways and stop eating people, they would let them live. There was no response, and so they started the fire, and according to Winnemucca, her people continued to plead with them to just stop eating people like animals, and they would put out the fire and let them live. But there was no response. The fire roared, and her people left before returning 10 days later, at which time they said, judging by the smell, everyone was dead. She says this group was called the People Eaters, and after the battle, her people, the Paiutes, gained the name Se Do Kara, which means both conqueror and enemy. She also claims that this group did have reddish hair, even saying that she has some of it sewn into what she calls the mourning dress, and that her family has the only one of it in existence. If there's some things in this story that you expected to hear that you feel like are missing, I promise you, I didn't leave them out. They are genuinely missing from this story. Okay, with that, you now have probably the most complete picture you need without rambling on for another fucking hour. You got Loud's excavation and the reports from the guano miners, Reed's grave robbing and the data that he produced, and Sarah Winnemucca's 700-word anecdote in this book. From this crystallization, a whole host of other authors, grifters, and conspiracy theorists would add to, embellish, and twist this story throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. But we're not gonna bother sifting through the minutia of those muddy waters, because this is the information that all of it is hinged on. So with all of that out of the way, let's revisit our conspiracy theory videos and solve this thing once and for all. Oh, all right, I guess now we actually have to talk about this conspiracy theory. I thought we were done. I was having a great time talking about real archaeology, crashed out for a minute about racism, but you know, wouldn't be a Milo Rossi video without that. And now is the point where I actually have to start talking about this fucking bullshit. Excellent. I know what this calls for. Guys, I don't say this lightly, but if you're empty and you are of legal age and sound mind to do so, this is the time where you can get up, pause the video, take a piss, and pay a visit to the fridge. Oh, hold on a sec, where is it? Yo, this is gonna be crazy. You guys ready for this? So instead, I'll pour it in this cool glass. Piss. If I see a single one of you say anything about that pour, actually, I would be shocked if I didn't, even if I didn't say that. That was dog shit. That was really bad. So Z and I were looking at all the stuff on Fourth Wall, the like merch provider that we do, and we were trying to think of some cool new designs. And we saw that they made glasses, and we were like, we should try what the print is like. So Z threw together this design to test what the glass printing was like. I fucking absolutely love it. We were debating, we were like, is it weird to put a dead guy on a drinking glass? I have no idea if that's ethical or not. I mean, I don't seem to have much of a problem with it. If I was dead for 5,000 years and someone put me on a glass of beer, I would be fucking honored. And then we also tried this glass, a tall glass with a different guy, a different design on it. I personally don't think it's that weird to drink out of a glass with a dead guy on it. It's better than drinking out of a glass with a dead guy in it, that's for damn sure. But I have no idea what the general consensus is, so if you guys would drink out of a glass with a dead guy on it, let me know and we'll put it on the store, but I didn't want to just fucking send it with that. That's pretty bold. Obviously, the biggest part of the Lovelock Cave story is the claim about giants. So I think this is the claim that we should analyze first. Real quick, let's just get a little refresher from our conspiracy friends.
Giants.
The giant.
But skeletal remains of extraordinary proportions.
Dug up in that cave.
7'7",
8.5 feet
to 9'6".
It's between 8 and 10 feet tall.
10 feet tall.
To 10 feet tall.
They literally used to have in the circuses people that were 6 feet.
7.
Saying, step right up.
Look, I had to just throw that one in there again, okay? I'm sorry. It's potentially one of the greatest lines and deliveries I have heard in my entire time doing this channel. It's so earnest. It fucking kills me every time. You'll notice that these numbers are all over the place, from 6'6" to 8 feet tall, all the way up to 10 feet. So I think a logical question is, where are they actually getting these numbers from? Well, I guess the sort of underwhelming answer is they're getting them from each other. These are conspiracy theorists, after all. They're not actually researching anything. Their research involves just watching a video about another person talking about the same thing and then just regurgitating their same points. We see it all the time on this channel. It's your classic conspiracy theory human centipede. But no matter how much human centipede is going on here, these numbers have to come from somewhere, and luckily for you, I can tell you exactly where. Let's start with the one that's 6'6" because it's the most closely tied to reality. Allegedly, a 6'6" red-haired mummy was found during the cave's excavation. When conspiracy theorists elaborate on this, it's sort of implied that Loud is the one that found it during his archaeological excavation, but it was actually discovered by James Hart, one of the miners who bought the mining rights to the cave in the beginning. And the only reason we know about this discovery is from an anecdote from Hart, who was talking about it almost 15 years later. The physical remains themselves were never documented in any way, and we have no actual evidence at all that it ever even existed. So how does this claim line up with what conspiracy theorists want us to believe? I want you to think back to Loud's report from his excavation at Lovelock Cave. Remember, even though his practices weren't amazing, his report was very thorough. And he does mention some things of note to this story, like evidence of fire and even some evidence of cannibalism. But you probably noticed that there was something really big missing. Something like really big. Giants. In fact, the only mention at all of not only giants, but red hair in all of Loud's report is him referring to Hart's anecdote about the 6'6" mummy he allegedly found more than 15 years before. If you want to pause the game or put the sponge down for a second, this is the entire anecdote that Loud quoted from Hart in his paper. So to make this exceptionally clear, throughout his entire report, he makes no mention about their size, their hair color, their race, or any other anomalies, despite modern conspiracy theorists sort of implying that he did. It is worth noting that 6'6" isn't entirely out of the realm of possibility. Sure, it's pretty tall, but it's not like completely impossible. But whether it's believable or not is kind of besides the point. The point is that we do not have any evidence of this discovery whatsoever, making the claim of the 6'6" red-headed mummy essentially just hearsay. Now let's have a look at the 8 to 10 footers. These claims all come from our boy Reed the Grave Robber. As you'll remember, Reed didn't get these numbers from measuring skeletons, he got them from measuring femurs. There was the 6.5-inch femur that he said belonged to someone that was 7'7", and the 18.5-inch femur that he said belonged to someone that was about 9'6". While this claim is definitely out there, it can be kind of easy for most people to accept it at face value for one particular reason. I know how big an average person is, and those people would be really big. But what I don't know is how big an average femur is. Obviously, it varies a lot based on your age, sex, ethnicity, health, etc. But a spitball park estimate for the size of the average human femur would be around 17 inches. Now, with that piece of information, these results might seem a little bit more suspicious. So considering that you watching this very well may have a femur that is the size of one of the ones that Reed measured and are most likely not 9.5 feet tall, we have to ask ourselves, how did Reed mess this up so badly? Well, the way that Reed got these numbers is by measuring these thigh bones against his own thigh bone. This might seem kind of clever. It's probably what I would do if I was robbing graves, you know? But there's actually a couple problems here. The least of which is that getting an average height for an individual based on a single bone is not super accurate, especially for someone with absolutely no experience in osteology. But the real problem with this is something that is just so much more painfully simple. Most people have no idea where your femur is actually placed in your leg. It's more than likely that Reed would measure the femurs while he was, sitting down, and he was measuring the length of his femur from his knee to somewhere around his crotch. But even though this is where you can kind of see your femur doesn't end here. It goes all the way up to a socket in your hip. So the way that Reed was measuring these femurs was producing an error of between 4 and 6 inches, which is an absolutely enormous error and would make anyone's femur look like it came from a giant. Okay, so that on its own pretty much completely destroys the 8 to 10 foot argument, but there's a little more to this story. I can't remember if I mentioned this earlier, but Reed's collection of stolen human remains that he based all of this data on ended up just sort of disappearing, and only his data remained. So for years after his death, conspiracy grifters republished and spread his data far and wide, and there was no real way to actually check any of it. But then in 1977, during a clean out of storage of the Nevada Historical Society, they found Reed's entire collection in boxes. These boxes contained a total of 31 burials. Among them, many of the remains that Reed had used to get this data. Now, scientists have a bit of a sense of humor. So even though you don't really need too much evidence to write off the 8 to 10 foot people claim, these rediscovered remains were subjected to osteological analysis. And lo and behold, when they were re-examined by people that actually knew what they were doing, they found that these individuals ranged in height from 5'5" to about 5'11", and that the men were anywhere from about 5'10" up to 6 feet. Tall for the time, certainly, but absolutely not giants. I gotta hammer that home because if we start counting 5'10" as giants, we have just unlocked an insufferable breed of man that has never been seen on this planet before. Yeah, I'm 5'10", but you know, back in, if we lived in Lovelock Cave, I would pretty much be a giant. What's interesting is that if we never actually found Reed's collections, we'd have no real way of proving him wrong. Even though his evidence is highly improbable, this just goes to show how important it is to have real physical evidence and how dangerous it can be to just rely on someone's word. So to put that all together, the claim that Lovelock Cave was home to giants between 6'6" and 10 feet tall rely on the claims of a miner from the early 1900s and a biblical fanatic who had no idea what he was doing. In short, I can tell you, backed by evidence and with the utmost certainty, that there were never any giants in Lovelock Cave. Whew, okay, that's a pretty big one out of the way. So now let's move on to something even more scary than giants: redheads. New video, Milo debunks redheads. This is gonna do fucking numbers, people. All right, same drill as last time. Let's get a little refresher from our conspiracy people.
The mummified remains with distinctive reddish hair. Red hair that glowed like fire in sunlight.
I don't know why I thought you needed a refresher for that one. It's pretty simple, really. I just wanted to throw some more clips in because they're just so damn funny. All right, so in the grand scheme of things, this redhead thing isn't quite as pressing because it's not as egregious as giants. The giants thing implies that they were a different race. It's used as a piece of biblical literalism. It's a lot more sort of nefarious than the redhead claim. But it does have a little bit of subtext around it that's worth looking into. The main origin of this claim comes from the discovery of Hart's 6'6" redheaded mummy. And while we don't have any evidence for that discovery, the challenging thing here is what actually constitutes redhead. Everyone views color sort of differently. If you've ever played Hues and Cues, you know that. That said, samples from both Reed's and Loud's excavations have been described as having a rusty reddish hair. So I'm willing to be generous here and say that red hair isn't totally incorrect, and that this rusty brown reddish color is kind of what you would expect for red hair for the Native American phenotype that has straight, dark brown or black hair. There's also some evidence that this redness may have been accentuated after death. Hair will often lighten during the mummification process, which can lead to it looking more red, and many of these graves were decorated with red ochre, which could have stained the hair as well. Now, I'm not going to pick that evidence apart that much because, again, it really doesn't matter. But the red hair thing matters for a totally different reason. The real reason that the red hair claim matters is because of people's perception of red hair. When most people think of red hair, they're thinking of the vibrant, bright, orangey red hair phenotype for white people. So even though it's very possible and potentially accurate to describe these individuals as having reddish hair, when conspiracy theorists say red-haired giants, they're conjuring an image to your mind of like an enormous Irish guy. Now, I don't want to go so far as to say that this is intentionally the direction they're trying to steer this, but it is worth noting that, true or not, the red hair claim is something that really is kind of a entry-level drug into some of the racialist subtext in this story. So I'm not going to split red hairs over this anymore, but I thought that was important to mention. Now let's move on to the only thing worse than redheads: cannibalism. The big sort of gasp moment in this campfire story is cannibalism. Not only were these giants redheads, but they ate people. I know, you didn't think it could get any worse. I remember a long time ago in a video I made like a dig like that at people who are left-handed.
Sorry, I'm not left-handed because I'm not a fucking loser.
And let me tell you, people lit me up for that. I could hear them clattering away with only their left hand. That's not how that works. But to all my left-handed viewers out there, I'd like to formally bury the hatchet because I have now moved on to redheads. Okay, anyway, cannibalism. Jesus. You know how this works already? Play the clip show.
They possessed an insatiable hunger for human flesh and cannibalism.
It sounds pretty scary. Despite this also being a core claim of this story, there is almost no evidence for this whatsoever. This entire claim is predicated on a single paragraph in Loud's report. Pause the game again, here's the entire excerpt on screen. Loud claims that he found 3 human bones that were split to extract marrow. He notes that this was potentially a sign of cannibalism during a famine, and also explicitly notes that these were the only artificially split human bones found during the entire dig, which again was pretty much everything left in the cave, so if there were any there, he would have found them. Subsequent excavations and studies would continue this trend, and to date, this single paragraph by Loud is the only mention of cannibalism in all of Lovelock Cave. It seems that this paragraph was taken, combined with the oral history, and then ballooned to become a major part of this story. I'm sure that some of you have thought to yourselves, well, if the guano miners destroyed the top 3 to 6 feet of strata in this cave, wouldn't evidence of this event be lost? That is a very observant point. It's implied that this battle happened fairly recently, and so these remains would be in the top layers of strata. But this is where it's important to remember that the miners just threw stuff out of the cave. So even though the strata had been disturbed, Loud still found all of the artifacts they had discarded. And in all of those artifacts from the top layers of the cave, there was no further evidence of cannibalism or giants. So while it's possible and even likely that cannibalism took place at Lovelock Cave at some point, and that it may have even been a nugget of truth at the bottom of the oral history, there is no evidence whatsoever that this was a widespread cultural phenomenon. And so the claim that Lovelock Cave was home to a race of cannibals is almost definitively false. All right, now let's have a look at some of the more strange pieces of evidence that these weirdos are coming up with. The first of these is obviously a giant handprint on the wall. Fellas, roll the clips.
Of a giant handprint?
There was this black hand.
Excavators discovered a handprint embedded in stone that measured twice the size of an average human palm.
All right, so this one is, I mean, it's just stupid. This thing's a goddamn Rorschach test. It's like people, you know, seeing the Virgin Mary in like a water stain. This stain could be all kinds of stuff. It could be actual soot, it could be lamp black, it could be a marking from people exploring the cave at some point. But rather than speculate about those things, I'll tell you what I do know, and that is that the very first mention of this handprint that I can find anywhere is in this video. It's called M.K. Davis and Don Monroe discover a giant handprint in Lovelock Cave, Nevada in 2013.
Talk about giant feet, well, yeah, a giant hand. You see, it's got ridges.
I see it.
See ridges down
I see
here?
it, absolutely. It's even got the joints on
Yeah.
it. For me, I can see the joint parts.
Oh, it's just too easy sometimes. It's just too easy. People will be like, Milo, how do you do what you do? I'm like, dude, you can do this as well. Look, this is just common sense. Whatever this thing is, it's pretty notable on the cave wall, and it is not noted at all in any previous excavation. And the first time that it's ever brought up is by a group of Bigfoot hunting conspiracy nuts in a video in 2003. Can I confidently say that this is a hoax? Not particularly. Could I boldly claim that they are the ones that created this hoax? I'm not gonna go that far. Is it strange that no one has mentioned it until 2003? Absolutely. And is it very interesting that the first people to mention it are 2 people who would have a lot to gain from a discovery like this? Without a doubt. Like I said, this thing is just stupid, and with the actual skeletal evidence of giants debunked earlier, this is literally not worth any more breath. The burden of proof rests on the Bigfoot people. So let's move down to the giant shoe.
It was a sandal measuring 15 inches in length.
A pair of sandals about 15 inches long.
The famous 15-inch sandal, twice the size of a modern men's size 12 shoe, was confirmed to belong to someone approximately 8 feet tall.
Fit someone who's about 9 feet tall.
All right, so the claim here is that there was this sandal found that's like 15 inches long and would fit someone between 8 and 9 feet tall. Again, no one can really seem to keep their numbers straight. I'm not surprised because something is bound to get lost through the human centipede. Now, I looked into this a lot, and honestly, I just have no idea what shoe they're even talking about. The one that I think they mean is this one, which they just keep using this same image. I have no idea what this display is from. I assume it's like a regional museum in the area, but there's really no other like scholarly research on a shoe that's really big from this site. So I literally can't even like go into it. But since this is what we have to go off, for now we'll talk about this. Look at that shoe. It's barely even intact. It's like half of it is missing. There's more less shoe than there is shoe. I could launch into a whole thing about how a 15-inch long shoe wouldn't fit a 9-foot person, or how measuring a person from their shoe size is super inaccurate, or how trying to size half a 1,000-year-old sandal made out of grass using a modern shoe chart is the dumbest thing I've heard in my life. But I'm not gonna do that. because that would be a waste of my time and energy. Saying that this is evidence for giants is absolutely pathetic, so let's move on to something much more important, the oral history. We talked about Sarah Winnemucca earlier. Real quick, let's refresh ourselves on how conspiracy theorists view her story.
According to tribal historian Sarah Winnemucca.
What happened according to Sarah Winnemucca?
Sarah Winnemucca.
And Sarah Winnemucca.
The Citica.
Citica.
The Citica.
The Citica.
The Citaka, the Citaka, the Citaka, the Citaka, the Citica, the Citica.
Hold themselves up in the Lovelock Cave. And the Paiute people.
They piled all sorts of brush.
And lit the place on fire.
So as the fire's burning, the giants come out, they killed all the giants.
So this matches the story almost precisely.
I know I said this earlier, but it's just insane to me how conspiracy theorists will so boldly talk about doing their own research and so clearly not do their research. Like, I genuinely believe that not a single one of these people actually read her story. The biggest emphasis in Winnemucca's story is on the cannibalism. That's the entire rift between her people and the barbarians. And again, there is fragmentary archaeological evidence to support some cannibalism. She also mentions them having reddish hair, and even that she has some reddish hair that has been handed down through her family, something that is also more or less corroborated with archaeological evidence. She mentions their bravery and their agility, but she doesn't mention anything about their size. In fact, she refers to this group as barbarians, not giants. She never says giants a single time. I try not to stoop to the point of calling people stupid, but how can you turn on a camera and just not even bother to check the shit you're saying? God, it pisses me off. There's a few other things from her story that are worth noting, like she mentions nothing about shooting them as they escaped the fire. She just talks about skirmishes around the lake. She also says that these barbarians were known as the people eaters, and the Siteka, or tool eaters, is not even mentioned once in the entire story. She mentions that her people gained the name the Sado Kara, but there's no mention of the Siteka. Now, in fairness, there are certainly other tellings of this story. Like all oral history cultures, there's going to be some differences throughout, and I'm sure some of them refer to the barbarians as the Siteka, and I wouldn't even be shocked if some of them call the barbarians giants. But since Sarah Winnemucca's story is the one that conspiracy theorists view as gospel, it's the one that I want to focus on. If for no other reason, to underscore the fact that conspiracy theorists are a bunch of mindless sheep who will blindly repeat things that support their anti-establishment narrative. I obviously think that it is absolutely worth looking at Winnemucca's story for a grain of truth. Many oral histories preserve fragments of real events, and it's really interesting to think about what the nugget of truth might be in this ancient story. While I'm not going to go into a whole analysis of it here, I encourage you to post your analyses in the comments. But there is one little interesting detail that I noticed in this story that's pretty interesting. Sarah Winnemucca never once mentions Lovelock Cave. Now, I know she doesn't mention any cave by name, but what she does say is that the barbarians live in a cave north of Humboldt Lake. You'll remember from earlier that Lovelock Cave is on a ridge south of Humboldt Lake. So the icing on the cake for this whole thing is that in this story that conspiracy theorists don't shut up about, there is actual evidence that it didn't even take place at Lovelock Cave. It's just too good. It's just too good. I'm torn between like analyzing the oral history in like a legitimate way or just ragging on conspiracy theorists because of how stupid they are. For time, I'll just go for the third option, which is moving on to the next thing. And that is, of course, conspiracy theorists finding evidence for this final massacre at Lovelock Cave.
These weren't natural deaths or ceremonial burials, evidence of intense burning.
Look at all the burn marks.
Signs of violent trauma. Unlike typical archaeological sites where human remains are found in organized burial patterns reflecting cultural practices, the Lovelock Cave skeletons were discovered in chaotic positions near the entrance. The arrangement suggested people who had been trying to escape when death overtook them.
The evidence for the final battle that conspiracy theorists claim to have hinge on two things: the fire and the bones. Both of these claims are really, really bad. You don't have to be an archaeologist to see that there's soot on the roof of this cave, but that's to be expected from a cave that's been inhabited for almost 5,000 years. All of the soot and ash found in this cave is in line with cooking hearths. There is no published evidence of some ultra-hot fire in this cave, so the sources that say this are literally just lying. Similarly, every single skeleton found was a deliberate burial. Yes, some of these burials had been disturbed by both people and by coyotes, but from every remain analyzed, from the deep burials that Loud found to the newest remains at the top of the cave that were thrown outside, there was not one single evidence of violence on any of the bones. There were no skull fractures, there was no damage associated with arrows, and most importantly, none of the bones were burned. If they trapped them in this cave and set them on fire, their bones would be charred. How is it logical to expect that you would find a 6'6" red-headed mummy on the ground when they turned the cave into a jet engine? Do these people even listen to themselves? It's just, They're like, wow, the fire was so hot, which it wasn't, and all the bones had arrowheads in them, which they didn't. But how has not one of these morons mentioned that all the bones should be charred? Oh, because it doesn't support them. I answered my own question, forget I asked. In short, there is no evidence at all to support the massacre and immolation of the inhabitants of Lovelock Cave. It simply does not exist. Now, we've disproven or explained pretty much everything up until this point, but conspiracy theorists, of course, keep rolling, which means that we now get to talk about probably the weirdest part of this whole thing. Yeah, baby, time for some weird racism.
That the Redheads had, quote, long faces and were light-skinned, like white men.
DNA extraction revealed not only European ancestry, but also specific markers associated with Bronze Age populations from the Pontic-Caspian steppe region.
It has not been established definitely that the mummies were those of Indians, for their skin was much lighter and the eye sockets of the mummies were slanted, like Oriental eyes.
The Citations were indeed a separate people, possibly survivors of transoceanic migration.
And they have been buried in a similar manner to the way it was done in ancient Egypt.
The DNA signatures pointed to European ancestry.
Oh my God, this gives me a headache. Again, it really seems like no consensus has been reached here. Who would have thought that a group of people that don't trust anyone except their own biases would have a hard time coming to an agreement on something? They were Europeans, they were Asians, they were Egyptians, they were Nephilim, they were literally anything except Native Americans. All right, it's really tempting for me to grab my soapbox for this one, but you guys don't need me to explain how gross this is. So instead, I can debunk literally all of this in like one sentence. There has never been a single piece of genetic, material, or cultural evidence to even suggest that the inhabitants of Lovelock Cave were anything other than a group of Native Americans from the Great Basin. These claims are weird at best and downright racist at worst, and perfectly exemplify how pseudo-archaeological claims, even when they sound fun and interesting, can act like a gateway drug and pull people into much more dangerous ways of thinking. I promised I'd refrain from my soapbox. I'm gonna stay good to that promise. This perfectly leads us into my favorite part of every conspiracy. This is the dessert. And that is, of course, their predictable final act. Science bad.
Scientific skepticism and the suppression of evidence.
Many scientists have become dismissive.
How did the scientific establishment react? Swift and decisive skepticism that bordered on denial.
The archaeological evidence, as usual, just seems to go missing.
Mainstream archaeologists, museum storage facilities that once housed the most compelling giant remains, experienced mysterious losses and transfers to restricted access areas.
The reason why it's been deliberately obfuscated, because it points back to the supernatural worldview. It points back to the biblical narratives.
That revealed how deeply the suppression of Lovelock Cave evidence extended into academic and government circles. What emerged was evidence of systematic information control that had been operating for decades.
Oh man, finish your drink. It's just the most predictable thing imaginable. The reason you don't know is because big archaeology, big academia, the mainstream agenda, blah, 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 blah. I love this part because it's just done by lying. You know the whole joke about the Nigerian prince phishing emails to like get people's bank account information? We look at it and we're like, how do people fall for this? It's full of typos, it's very obviously a scam. But the thing that I think is really interesting about those scams is that that's completely intentional. Those scams aren't targeting people like us. In fact, the reason that they are written that way is to filter us out. Because if someone gets to the bottom of that email and is still believing in it, chances are they are someone that is gullible enough that they'll actually go through with the following steps and give their bank account information. And the weird thing is that I feel like a lot of these conspiracy videos kind of work in the same way. People like us aren't supposed to have gotten this far. Everything up until this point has weeded out all of the people that believe in the cult of science and big academia. And so by the time they get to the end, they can just lay it on thick with their anti-establishment, anti-intellectual biases. And the only people left by this point in the video are the poor souls ignorant enough to have not seen any of the red flags up until this point. This is the point where the videos just become mostly lies. I want you to watch these clips about two researchers who were doing a study at Lovelock Cave.
Dr. Margaret Henderson, a forensic anthropologist who gained access to restricted museum storage in the 1990s, made disturbing discoveries that challenged the official narrative. Her research funding was terminated without explanation, access to restricted collections was permanently revoked, and pressure from unnamed federal agencies forced her to abandon the project entirely. The pattern wasn't limited to Henderson. Dr. James Morrison, an archaeological geneticist who attempted to obtain DNA samples from Lovelock Cave, remains for comprehensive genetic analysis, experienced similar obstacles. His formal requests were repeatedly denied through bureaucratic channels. Funding for his proposed study was mysteriously withdrawn, and eventually, he was advised to pursue less controversial research topics.
You probably already see where this is going given the context of where we're at in the video, but all of that is completely fake. Literally not a single word of that is true. Those studies do not exist. Those researchers do not exist. But do you want to know what does exist? Those two people exist. The woman is Margaret Henderson, and she's a retired teacher from the UNC School of Government. And the man is James Morrison, who's a professor at the University of Delaware. This absolutely blew my mind. I figured that there was no code of ethics that an AI conspiracy grifter account subscribes to, but using images of real people without their permission and fabricating a whole story about how science is evil is absolutely insane. It's not worth looking into any of the science bad claims at all. And there you guys were, thinking I wasn't gonna get on a soapbox. I just couldn't bear myself to see it sitting in that corner, unstood upon. Lovelock Cave uses the same three-part conspiracy template that you see in a lot of other ancient history conspiracy theories. The first part is the evidence that goes against the narrative, in this case, the giant skeletons. The second part strengthens this by finding an oral history that sort of aligns, in this case, the Citations. And finally, from this defensible position, the third point, which is just hammering home the anti-establishment narrative. In this case, the same tired script that it always is about big archaeology and the cover-up, whatever. These three steps are repeated in nearly every single ancient history conspiracy theory, and it's because it's a brilliant tactic. Evidence that's shaky at best is made more believable by an appeal to spirituality, or by giving your audience an enemy to rage against, like the establishment that's trying to hide something from you. Like all conspiracies, it's not meant to be informative, it's meant to be emotionally manipulative, and that's the reason that they're so effective. Now, if you believed a little bit in this theory coming into this, I really don't want you to feel bad. I have no problem at all with the people who end up sort of believing these things. I will forever be sympathetic of someone who is taken advantage of. Being tricked is never the victim's fault. But you lose that armor when you begin taking advantage of others. That's why the conspiracy theorists that I have a problem with are not the random people that believe in them, but the people that irresponsibly spread them and continue to manipulate others. The most frustrating part of this is that everyone would be able to draw an accurate conclusion if they were just given good information in the first place. Lovelock Cave is a fascinating topic with a rich archaeological history, Native American oral history, and fragments of truth that are worth looking at. But the real shame is that the conspiracy theorists pushing this narrative intentionally obfuscate that real information, and as a result keep us, their victims, in the dark when we would be capable of drawing our own conclusion if they didn't lie to us. But the broader consequence of this is that while a lot of people know about Lovelock Cave, no one actually knows the real story of Lovelock Cave. All this bullshit about giants has fully eclipsed the real story of the real people that actually lived there. For 5,000 years, real people like you and I called this cave home. They shared meals together here, they slept here, some were born and some died here. And when they died, they were buried in graves dug by their loved ones. They dressed the dead in their finest clothes and buried them with feathers and beads and all of the beautiful things that they loved in life. And they grieved them in the same way that you or I would grieve the death of a loved one, a sibling, a parent, or a child. And these graves were destroyed by men who viewed their remains as worth less than shovelfuls of batshit. Their bones, ripped from their final resting places, were thrown out into the scorching desert where they were smashed on rocks and left to bleach in the sun. And when they were collected, it wasn't as remains, but as specimens, organized, divided, and kept in boxes, and used as proof of everything from biblical biblical literalism to America's lost white races. Like many aspects of Native people, those that lived in Lovelock Cave have been turned into nothing more than a commodity, both physically through the plundering of their graves, and culturally by turning them into a campfire story about a race of flesh-eating giants. A truly disgusting and dehumanizing conclusion that has become so normalized that it's repeated everywhere from TikTok to YouTube to the History Channel. As simple as it may seem, it's important for us to remind ourselves that the dead have no voice. They have no way of speaking up for themselves. And so, as the conclusion is so often in these videos, we the living have a responsibility and an obligation to tell the story of the dead as accurately and as honestly as possible. From the joy that they must have felt when creating an immaculate duck decoy, to the desperation and panic that brings someone to split and eat a human bone. If we allow ourselves to look at these graves and see them not as one of us, but as a race just inherently barbaric and violent, then it opens the door for us to start looking at people in the present the exact same way. And once you've allowed yourself to start seeing groups of your fellow man as inhuman savages by virtue of their race, then the only real monster is you. Oh my God, that was a cold one. I could keep talking about this, but I think my editors would kill me if I filmed anymore. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's one I've been wanting to make for a while, and I really hope I did the topic justice. If you felt like you took something away from this, I would love if you could share this video with a friend. It helps spread the good information, and also helps get this video boosted in the algorithm so it can compete against all of the terrible bullshit out there. Like I always say, it's like tipping the bellhop. I make all my videos for free here on YouTube, and likes, shares, and comments helps me continue making them here for free, and it doesn't cost you a cent. So make sure to leave a little something. It helps us continue doing what we do here. If you're really locked in playing video games and doing your chores right now, as I know you are, why let the binge stop here? I got plenty more videos like it that I'm sure you'll get a kick out of, and I can continue helping you drown out the voices. And if you want to support the channel directly, go check out some of those pins, baby. Link to that is in the description. Grab one for you, grab one for your friend, grab one for your friend's mom. Grab your friend's mom while you're at it. Don't do that. I don't condone that behavior. And lastly, I'd of course like to give a huge thank you to my editorial team. I am the one in front of the camera, but they are the ones that actually turn this into something that is worth watching. You may not see their faces, but they are the reason that these videos even happen, so make sure to give them a big thank you as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you all very much for watching. Remember to stay curious, stay inquisitive, and most importantly, let's start putting tall people in zoos. And we are capital D-un, capital Dijon, capital Dijon Franco, if you will. I know I will. Oh my God, it's so fucking cold. I'm really glad I filmed all of this on a different day, dude. This is capital B bad. This is capital B Gianfranco. They're not, whoa, my beer's getting away. My beer's escaping. That's what you get, never do that again. Hell yeah. That lighting might be a little better, and that lighting's gonna be a lot worse, I think. I mean, hey, if this cave was occupied by a group of people that all looked like Orlando Bloom, I can tell you one thing for certain, they never would have gone extinct. Metal. That's not even the right one. That's also not the right one. And this set of mini pins that you can scatter around your house, give to your friends. But if y'all like it, you know, I'm not above this. Oatsy's Ice Brew. Delish. Drink responsibly. Hike responsibly. Oh my God, it's like straight up blizzarding. It's straight up blizzarding outside. And I now have to start working on Philip Zeba Revisited. Yay. I want you to watch this. I want you to watch this clip. I want you to watch this clip. I want you to watch this clip talking about two researchers. I want you to watch these clips about two researchers working on I want you to watch these clips. I want you to watch these clips about two researchers doing. I want you to watch these clips about two. I want you to watch these. I want you to watch these clips of two researchers. I want you to watch these clips of. I want you to watch these clips. I want you to watch these clips of two researchers. This is going to be one of those things that goes in the fucking credits, isn't it? I want you to watch these clips of two researchers just going at it.